Up next, let's talk about some chord progressions that start with the movement between our 1 chord and our 6 chord. Something that's kind of unique and fun about this is that those 2 chords share 2 out of the 3 same notes. Here's an example: C major, C, E, G, down to A minor, A, C, E. So C and E are common notes. And what that means to me, to some extent, is that whatever melody we come up with over our 1st chord, it kind of ends up working over the 6th chord as well too. So if you're looking for a melody that does a lot of repeating, it can sound really great moving between those 2 types of chords. That's also true for the minor equivalent, where we're moving between 1 and flat 6. In this case, C minor and A flat major both contain C and E flat, so the same philosophy applies. This one sounds particularly cinematic. It's one of my favorite movements, the 1 minor to the flat 6 major. So that's something worth knowing right off the bat, is that the 1 to 6 chord movement is going to give you a lot of overlapping notes or common notes between those 2 chords. So let's try out some chord progressions where we're starting with 1 to 6. And for now, our alternate keys will be D major with F sharp and C sharp, and D minor with a B flat, and in some cases, a C sharp. So we're going to be starting off with a 1-6-5-1 chord progression, finishing with a perfect cadence, 5 back to 1. So we end up getting 1, 6, 5, 1. Again with no inversions, 1, 6, 5, 1. That kind of has that old Motown sort of feel. It's a little bit hard with chords, but apologies for the shakiness, but you get the idea. So 1, 6, 5, 1, that was major. We can also try it minor. 1, flat 6, 5, and back to 1. This also sounds really cool if you put a dominant chord on both the flat 6 and the 5. There's something kind of vaudeville about it. This 1, dominant, flat 6, dominant 5, back to 1. It's not diatonic. In other words, that flat 6 with that additional note, this is not coming from C major, it's not coming from C minor, 2 dominant chords beside each other. It just feels like this shifting dominant sort of movement. So it's not too outside of the box. It's like an example of prolonged tension, but in this case, with neighboring dominant chords. So again, you get this. Good for like swing and vaudeville sort of styles. We have to try it in our alternate key, so let's try it out in D major first. 1, 6, 5, 1. You can also go up to 6. I prefer going down, but they're both options. Just moving up is a bit leapier. 1, flat 6, 5, 1, and with dominance, 1, flat 6 dominant, 5 dominant, 1. Some of my favorite chord progressions start with that 1 to 6 movement, and you can see how uniquely identifiable that 1 flat 6 dominant, 5 dominant sound is. It instantly pulls me into that sort of swing era. Let's move on to the next progression. Let's do a double predominant where we're adding 2 chords before our 5 chord. We're going to try out a 1-6-2-5-1, often in jazz known as a turnaround. And there's also 3-6-2-5-1. They can both kind of be considered turnarounds, but it's basically something you put at the end of a chord progression. Often in jazz scores, they'll put them in brackets because it's optional, but it's just more of a cue to the listener that things are about to return back to the beginning of the song, hence the term turnaround. So in C major, we have 1, 6, 2, 5. Because this is a very jazzy progression, we're going to try it with 7th chords this time. So we have 1, 6, 2, 5. So 1 is major 7, major chord with a semitone below the octave. 6 is minor 7, minor chord with a tone below the octave. 2 is another minor 7, and G is dominant 7, major with a tone below the octave. So we get this really colorful sounding chord progression. But we can also try it while still in our major key with all dominant chords. It's going to sound a little bit bluesier, but it still does sort of transcend that line between blues and jazz, and it's used a lot in both genres. Still a turnaround. Here it is. 1, 6, 2, 5, 1, dominant 6, dominant 2, dominant to the 5, and back to 1. So why does it work with all dominant chords? I want to take a minute to break that down. Because how do dominant 7th chords generally resolve? I'll give you a second. Do you know? Generally, they resolve down by a 5th. That's the classic example of a 5 going down a 5th to a 1 chord. 5 chord to 1 chord, and the 5 chord is dominant. For example, G dominant down to C dominant. So if dominant chords like to fall by a 5th, the question could be, for that 5 of C, so we're on G dominant, the 5 of C, what's the 5 of this chord? Well, it's the 2. So we're going to make that dominant. And what's the 5 of this chord? Well, it's the 6. And if we do go further, we can see that we get this 3 chord as well, too. So you have 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. Maybe you want to finish it not on a dominant chord. That's up to you. But that's why all these extra dominant chords work within the context of this progression, is because they're all doing what they're supposed to do, essentially. They're falling by a 5th to the next chord, like a dog chasing its tail until eventually the dog gets worn out and falls asleep. So we have 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. And it's a very traditional sounding chord progression that you'll hear a lot within jazz, blues, and jazz blues, which is also a style. So let's also try it out in our minor key, and then we will go over and check things out in our alternate key as well too. So C minor, 1, flat 6, 2, 5, no inversions, here it is, 1, flat 6, 2, 5. You could make it dominant if you want. So there it is, 1, flat 6, 2, 5, 1. In the minor key, it sounds great, and it's used, again, quite a bit in jazz and other styles as well, too. But in the major key, that 1, 6, 2, 5, whether it is diatonic, in other words, true to a key, or with all dominant chords, you're going to hear that a lot. So be ready for it. And if you want to study jazz theory and jazz harmony, just understand you're going to see that chord progression quite a bit. So make sure you have it as part of your arsenal. Over to D major and D minor, we would have 1, 6, 2, 5. This is also known as rhythm changes. It has quite a few names. Turnaround, rhythm changes. It's very fundamental. You hear it a bunch. Let's put some 7ths on it. Major 7, minor 7 on the 6, minor 7 on the 2, dominant 7 on the 5, or we could go all dominant. Dominant 1, dominant 6, dominant 2, dominant 5, and lastly we can try it minor. 1, flat 6 is major, 2 is diminished, 5 is dominant. Working up through some inversions of the 5 chord for dramatic effect. And then back to our 1. So there it is, 1, 6, 2, 5, 2 different major versions and 1 minor version. You will hear it a lot, and try to understand why that dominant version works, because it's dominant chords falling a 5th to more dominant chords. So as long as you're keeping that next chord dominant, you can keep dropping by a 5th. And I do recommend when you're practicing, quite often, make sure that you're trying these dominant chords in that sort of fashion. You can practice them chromatically, like C dominant 7, C sharp dominant 7, D dominant 7. But it makes a lot more sense to practice them like C7 down a 5th, F7 down a 5th, and just continue to chase these 5ths around the piano. I'm using a lot of inversions. I'm kind of going through it a little bit quickly, but I'm not here to give you a very fleshed out dominant exercise. But if you are one to practice your dominant chords, that's a great way to try it. Falling by 5ths, or essentially also moving up by a 4th, because down a 5th is the same as up a 4th, right? C down to F, or C up to F. Next up, we're going to be trying our 1, 6, 4, 5 chord progression. In our major key, we'll recognize it pretty instantly from that Heart and Soul classic piano duet. You might recognize it. Could be a generational thing, but very common in old piano duets. There's minor versions, there's major versions. Let's get into it. Again, our alternate key is D major, D minor. Let's try it out. So in C major we have 1, 6, 4, 5, 1 is major, down a skip, 6 is minor, down a skip, 4 is major, 5 is major. You can also try it with 7th chords. 1 is major 7, 6 is minor 7, 4 is major 7, and G is dominant 7. Now it's getting a little bit jazzier. You will hear this chord progression sometimes in jazz. 1, 6, 4, 5. Let's try it minor. 1, flat 6, 4, 5, where the 1 is minor, the flat 6 is major, 4 is minor, 5 is major. Very back and forth. Sounds great with 7th chords. 1 is minor 7, flat 6 is major 7, 4 is minor 7, and 5 is dominant. So feel free to play around with that one. There it is, 1, 6, 4, 5 in C major, 1, 6, 4, 5 in C minor. Let's move it over to D. 1, 6, 4, 5. Let's spice it up a bit with some 7ths. 1, 6, moving, passing tones in between, just filling out our left hand a bit. 1, 6, 4, 5. Again, major 7, minor 7, major 7, dominant 7. Let's try it out in D minor. So we have minor 1, major, flat 6, minor 4, let's say dominant 5, 1, flat 6, 4, 5. Let's put some 7ths on it. Minor 7th, major 7th, minor 7th, dominant 7th. Sounds great with like a blues scale. So there it is, a double predominant chord progression. In other words, 1 something something 5 1. In this case, 1 6 4 5 1. And now we're going to put a little twist on it that only works in the major key, but it's a very beautiful progression, and we will wrap up our 1 6 chord progressions with this one. So the progression is 1 6 4 minor 4, and then back to 1. There's just something very melancholy about this, kind of romantic, and it's fun because it's outside the box a little bit. Where does this minor 4 chord come from? Well, again, it's borrowed harmony or parallel harmony from our C minor scale. So here it is, 1, 6, 4, minor 4, back to 1. We can also try it in D major. Here it is, 1, down a skip to the 6, down a skip to the 4, minor 4, and then back to the 1. Here it is with a bit of a melody. Beautiful, and a great way for us to finish these 1 6 chord progressions. I will see you in the next class.